The advertisement in the Helena, Montana newspaper had been simple enough. Mountain man seeks bride, must be strong of heart and spirit, willing to endure harsh winters and simple living. Write to Zachary Winters, care of Johnson's Trading Post, Rawhide, Nevada, 1877. What Zachary had not anticipated was receiving 2 letters in response, both penned in identical handwriting, both signed with different names, and both arriving on the same dusty stagecoach on a blistering August afternoon. Zachary stood outside the trading post, his muscular frame casting a long shadow across the weathered planks of the boardwalk. His dark hair, streaked with hints of copper from the sun, hung past his shoulders and was tied back with a leather cord. Years of hauling timber, hunting game, and surviving the unforgiving mountains had sculpted his body into something that looked carved from granite itself. At 28, he had decided it was time to find a wife, someone to share the burden and beauty of his isolated existence in a cabin nestled high in the Sierra Nevada foothills, just beyond the sparse settlement of Rawhide. The stagecoach rumbled to a stop in a cloud of dust and creaking wood. Zachary watched as the driver climbed down and opened the door. First emerged a young woman with honey-colored hair piled high beneath a modest traveling bonnet, her green eyes wide with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She wore a simple but well-made blue traveling dress, now covered in trail dust. Behind her came another young woman, identical in every way except for the slightly different arrangement of her hair and the fact that her dress was a muted brown. Zachary's breath caught in his throat. Twins. Both beautiful, both looking around the small desert town with expressions that shifted between disappointment at the harsh surroundings and determination to make the best of their situation. The first woman spotted him, seemed to recognize something in his bearing, and approached with her carpetbag clutched in both hands. "Mr. Winters, I am Beatrice Palmer. I answered your advertisement." Before Zachary could respond, the second woman stepped forward, her chin raised. "I am Bonnie Palmer. I also answered your advertisement." Zachary looked between them, his mind racing. He had received 2 letters, yes, but he had assumed they were from different women in different places, not twin sisters traveling together. The situation was impossible. He had advertised for one bride, one wife to share his life. He could not marry both, yet looking at their faces, travel worn and anxious, he could not simply send one away. "Ladies," he finally managed, his voice rough from disuse. He spent most of his days alone in the mountains, and conversation did not come easily. "I believe there has been some confusion." Beatrice and Bonnie exchanged a glance, something passing silently between them as only twins could manage. Beatrice spoke first. "We both read your advertisement, Mr. Winters. We both wrote to you, hoping you might choose one of us. Our circumstances in Boston became quite difficult after our father passed 6 months ago. We have no other family, no means of support, and the few options available to unmarried women in the city were not appealing." Bonnie continued where her sister left off, their voices similar, but Bonnie's slightly deeper, more measured. "We agreed to both write to you and let you decide. We hoped that perhaps whichever one you did not choose might find work in the town, or that the journey west would provide other opportunities. We had nothing left to lose." The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street. A few townspeople had gathered to watch the drama unfold, as entertainment was scarce in Rawhide. Zachary was acutely aware of their audience, but more importantly, he was aware of the desperate hope in both women's eyes. They had risked everything on the chance that a stranger might offer them a better life. "How old are you both?" he asked, needing to understand their situation better. 22, they answered in unison. Then Beatrice added, "Born 3 minutes apart. I am the elder." Zachary removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, the muscles in his arms flexing with the movement. He had built his cabin to accommodate a wife, with space for children eventually, but it was still just one cabin, one bedroom beyond the main living area. Yet the idea of turning either of them away, of forcing them to fend for themselves in a town that had little use for unmarried women beyond the saloon, sat wrong in his gut. "I cannot marry you both," he said bluntly, "but I will not leave either of you stranded here. You will both come to my cabin. You will both be safe under my roof until we figure out what is to be done. I give you my word as a man that you will be treated with respect and honor." The sisters exchanged another look, longer this time, communicating in that mysterious way twins had. Finally, Bonnie nodded. "We accept your offer, Mr. Winters. We are grateful for your kindness." "Call me Zachary," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "My wagon is at the livery. We have about 4 hours of travel ahead of us, and I would like to reach the cabin before dark. The mountain paths are not forgiving after sunset." He helped them load their modest belongings into his sturdy wagon, noting how little they had brought with them. Everything they owned in the world fit into 2 carpet bags and a small trunk. As they left Rawhide behind, heading into the foothills where ponderosa pines began to replace the sage and scrub of the desert valley, Zachary found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passengers. Beatrice sat beside him on the wagon bench, her posture perfect despite the jostling of the rough trail. She asked questions about the landscape, the wildlife, the cabin, her voice bright with genuine curiosity. Bonnie sat in the back, quieter, observing everything with thoughtful green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "You must think us terribly forward," Beatrice said during a lull in conversation. 2 women throwing themselves at a stranger. Zachary kept his eyes on the trail, guiding the horses around a particularly rocky section. "I think you are brave. It takes courage to leave everything you know and travel across the country on nothing but faith. I respect that." "Our father was a banker," Bonnie said from behind them. "When he died, we discovered he had debts we knew nothing about. The house was sold to pay his creditors. We had a little money left, enough for the journey west. A friend of our mother's, before she passed 10 years ago, had come west and written about the opportunities, the freedom. We thought perhaps we might find the same." "You will find freedom here," Zachary assured them, "but you will also find hardship. The winters are brutal. Supplies must be laid in carefully. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. It is a hard life, but it is honest. The cabin, when they finally reached it as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, was larger than the sisters had expected. Built from thick logs chinked with mud and moss, it sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. A stream ran nearby, its voice a constant whisper in the background. Zachary had built it himself over the course of 2 years, and the pride he felt in his work was evident in every solid beam and carefully fitted joint. Inside, the main room held a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a cooking area. A ladder led to a loft space, and a door opened to a separate bedroom. "You will both take the bedroom," Zachary said, already moving their bags toward the door. "I will sleep in the loft. It is not what I intended when I built this place, but it will serve." Beatrice touched his arm, stopping him. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, and he realized it had been a very long time since he had felt a woman's touch. "You are being more than generous, Zachary. We cannot take your bed." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "I will not have it any other way. Now you must both be hungry. I will prepare something while you settle in." Over the next few days, an unusual routine developed. Zachary woke before dawn, as was his habit, and began the day's work. He was a trapper and hunter primarily, selling furs and meat to the trading post in Rawhide and occasionally guiding parties through the mountain passes. The sisters proved to be far more capable than he had expected. Both had been raised in comfort, but neither shied away from the work that needed doing. Beatrice threw herself into learning everything she could about their new environment. She followed Zachary on his shorter treks, asking endless questions about tracking, about reading the weather, about which plants were safe and which were poison. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Zachary found himself looking forward to her company. Bonnie took to managing the cabin itself with quiet efficiency. She had a gift for organization and planning that transformed the somewhat haphazard bachelor's dwelling into something more refined while maintaining its rustic functionality. She also, Zachary discovered, had a beautiful singing voice that filled the cabin in the evenings with old songs from the East. But the situation could not continue indefinitely, and Zachary knew it. He was growing attached to both women in different ways, and the impropriety of their living arrangement, while necessary given the circumstances, weighed on his conscience. He was a man who lived by a strict code of honor, and he had promised to marry one woman, not house two indefinitely. 3 weeks after their arrival, as September brought cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color to the aspens, Zachary decided it was time to address the situation directly. He waited until after supper, when the three of them sat around the table playing cards by lamplight, something that had become their evening ritual. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, setting down his cards. The sisters exchanged that look again, and Zachary realized he had come to understand some of their silent communication. This look was resigned, sad, as if they had been expecting this moment and dreading it. Bonnie spoke first. "You need to choose which of us you will marry. Or send us both back to town to find our own way," Beatrice added, though her voice wavered slightly. Zachary shook his head. "I will not send you to town. But yes, I advertised for a wife, and I meant it. This mountain needs a woman's touch, a partner to share the load. I'm not getting any younger, and I want children before I'm too old to teach them what they need to know to survive out here." "How are we to decide this?" Beatrice asked, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Bonnie and I have never been separated. We are halves of a whole, yet we cannot both marry you." Zachary had been thinking about this problem every night as he lay in the loft, listening to the sisters whisper to each other in the bedroom below. He had no easy answer. In the time they had been here, he had come to care for them both. Beatrice's fire and curiosity matched something in his own spirit. Bonnie's quiet strength and steady presence brought him peace he had not known he was missing. "I have a proposal," he said slowly. "Winter is coming. It will be hard, harder than anything you have experienced. Stay through the winter, both of you. Help me see this place through to spring. By then, we will all know each other better. We will know if this life suits you, if you can truly bear it. And perhaps by then, the right choice will be clear to all of us." "And if it is not clear?" Bonnie asked, her practical nature showing through. "What then?" "Then we will face that when we come to it," Zachary said. "But I will not force a decision now, not when you have only been here 3 weeks. Marriage is forever. It should not be rushed." The sisters agreed, though Zachary could see the conflict in their faces. He understood. They were caught between fear of the unknown and hope for the future, between their bond as sisters and their individual desires for lives of their own. October brought the first snow, light dustings that melted by midday, but served as a warning of what was to come. Zachary worked longer hours, hunting and preserving meat, chopping and stacking firewood until the supply reached halfway up the cabin wall, checking and rechecking their supplies of flour, salt, coffee, and other staples. Beatrice proved to be a natural hunter. Zachary taught her to shoot his rifle, and after she overcame her initial squeamishness about killing, she became a decent shot. More importantly, she had patience and could sit still for hours waiting for game, something many people could never master. He took her on a 3-day hunting trip into the higher elevations, bringing down an elk that would provide meat for months. Bonnie, meanwhile, turned her attention to the root cellar, organizing everything with labels and lists, making sure they knew exactly what they had and what they might run short of. She also began experimenting with preserving and pickling, using techniques she had learned from a cookbook her mother had given her. The shelves in the cellar filled with jars of vegetables, fruits from the wild berry patches, and preserves that glowed like jewels in the lamplight. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, tensions began to rise in the cabin. The easy companionship of the early weeks gave way to something more complicated. Zachary found himself drawn to both women in ways that confused and frustrated him. He would catch himself watching Beatrice as she cleaned her rifle in the evening, admiring the determination in her face, the way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated. Then he would turn and find Bonnie watching him with those thoughtful green eyes, and his heart would stutter. The sisters felt it too, the shift in the atmosphere. They began to compete, subtly at first, then more openly. Beatrice would insist on accompanying Zachary on every expedition, no matter how dangerous. Bonnie would find excuses to be near him when he worked around the cabin, helping with repairs or asking his advice on matters she could easily have decided herself. The breaking point came in early November, during the first major snowstorm of the season. They were snowed in for 3 days, the world beyond the cabin walls disappearing in a white curtain. The close quarters amplified everything, every gesture, every word weighted with meaning it might not have carried in other circumstances. On the second evening, Beatrice confronted her sister directly. "You love him." They were preparing supper while Zachary was outside checking on the horses in the small barn he had built adjacent to the cabin. Bonnie froze, her hands stilling in the bread dough she was kneading. "So do you," Bonnie replied quietly. "I asked first," Beatrice said, her voice sharp with something between anger and pain. "When we decided to both write to him, we agreed that whoever he chose, the other would accept it and find her own way. But we never discussed what would happen if we both fell in love with him." Bonnie turned to face her sister, her hands covered in flour. "I did not plan for this, Bea. I thought I was being practical, managing the household, making myself useful. But somewhere along the way, he became more than just the man who saved us. When he laughs at something, really laughs, his whole face changes. When he comes back from a hunt and the first thing he does is make sure we are both safe and well, my heart feels too large for my chest. I love him, and I do not know what to do about it." Beatrice's anger deflated, replaced by misery. "I feel the same. When we are out in the wilderness, and he points out the tracks of a mountain lion, explaining how to tell how old they are, how dangerous the animal might be, I feel alive in a way I never did in Boston. He makes me want to be stronger, braver. And when he looks at me with those dark eyes, I forget how to breathe." The sisters stood in silence, the weight of their dilemma heavy between them. Outside, they heard Zachary stomping snow from his boots before entering. They quickly resumed their work, but the conversation had changed something. The competition was no longer subtle. Zachary noticed immediately. He was not an educated man in the traditional sense, but he had survived alone in the mountains for years by being observant, by reading signs and sensing danger. The tension between the sisters was palpable now, and he knew he was the cause. That night, unable to sleep, he made a decision. Come spring, he would choose. He would not draw this out any longer than necessary, would not put these women through more pain than he already had. But he would choose based on who truly belonged in this life, who could not just survive but thrive in the harsh beauty of the mountains. It was not fair, perhaps, to make them prove themselves through the hardest season, but Zachary could not imagine binding his life to someone who would grow to resent the isolation and hardship. He needed a true partner, and he needed to know which sister that would be. December was brutal. The snow piled high, and temperatures plunged so low that water froze solid in minutes if left outside. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, and Zachary spent hours each day ensuring they stayed ahead of the cold. The sisters worked alongside him, neither complaining, both determined to show they could handle whatever the mountain threw at them. Christmas arrived with little fanfare. They had no decorations, no gifts, but Bonnie surprised them both by producing a small cake she had somehow managed to make with their limited supplies. They sang carols, and for a few hours the tension eased, and they were simply three people finding comfort in each other's company in the midst of a frozen wilderness. But January brought new challenges. Zachary was checking his trap lines when he stumbled upon signs of a large predator, a mountain lion, judging by the tracks, and it was hunting dangerously close to the cabin. He increased his vigilance, making sure the sisters never went outside alone, even to the barn. One afternoon, while Zachary was splitting wood, Beatrice feeding the horses, and Bonnie inside preparing supper, the lion made its move. It had been drawn by the smell of the horses and was desperate enough to approach despite the presence of humans. Beatrice heard the horses' panicked whinny and looked up to see the massive cat crouched on the barn's roof, preparing to drop into the open stall. She did not scream. Instead, she grabbed the rifle Zachary had taught her to always keep close and fired. The shot was not perfect, hitting the lion in the shoulder rather than a vital spot, but it was enough to startle the animal and send it fleeing into the forest, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Zachary came running at the sound of the shot, his axe still in hand. He found Beatrice standing in the barn doorway, the rifle trembling in her hands, her face pale but determined. "Mountain lion," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I hit it, but not clean. It ran north." Zachary felt a surge of pride and something deeper, warmer. She had not panicked. She had protected what was theirs. He pulled her into his arms without thinking, holding her close as the adrenaline worked through both their systems. "You did well," he murmured into her hair. "Very well." Over Beatrice's shoulder, he saw Bonnie standing in the cabin doorway, having come out at the sound of the shot. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes reflected the lamplight behind her like mirrors. That night, Zachary tracked the wounded lion and finished it. He could not leave a dangerous wounded predator so close to the cabin. The tracking took him several hours, and when he returned, weary and bloodstained, both sisters fussed over him with equal concern. But something had shifted. Beatrice had proven herself in a moment of danger, and everyone knew it. February brought a brief thaw, then more snow. Supplies were running lower than Zachary liked, but they had enough. The sisters had learned to make do with less, to stretch ingredients and find satisfaction in simple meals. They had learned to endure the cold, the isolation, the bone-deep weariness that came from constant vigilance against the elements. They had also learned to read each other's moods, the three of them. Zachary could tell when Beatrice needed to get outside, when the cabin walls closed in on her adventurous spirit. He could tell when Bonnie was worried about something, when she needed reassurance that they would make it through. And the sisters could read him as well, knowing when to give him space and when he needed company. March arrived with longer days and the first signs that winter was loosening its grip. The snow began to melt in earnest, and green shoots appeared in the sheltered spots where the sun lingered. Zachary knew the time had come to make his decision. He asked both sisters to meet him by the stream one afternoon when the weather was fine and the air smelled of thawing earth and pine. They came, both beautiful in their simple dresses, their hair shining in the spring sunlight. They had changed since arriving last August. The pampered city girls were gone, replaced by strong women with capable hands and confident gazes. "I owe you both an apology," Zachary began, his voice rough with emotion. "I have put you through a winter of uncertainty, and that was not fair. But I needed to know, needed to be sure, because marriage is forever and this life is hard." He looked at Beatrice, at her sun-weathered face and the calluses on her hands from handling the rifle and working around the cabin. "Beatrice, you have proven yourself to be everything I could have hoped for in a partner. You are brave, capable, and strong. You love this land as I do, and you have earned your place here." Then he turned to Bonnie, saw the pain already gathering in her eyes. "Bonnie, you have made my cabin into a home. You have brought order and beauty to my rough existence. You have a gift for making the hard times bearable, for finding joy in simple things. Any man would be blessed to call you his wife." "But," Bonnie said softly, understanding what was coming. "But," Zachary confirmed, his heart aching, "I can only marry one of you. And when I ask myself who I want beside me in the deepest winter, who I want to watch the sunrise with from the high peaks, who I want to build this life with, my heart leads me to Beatrice." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, joy and sorrow mixing together. Joy for herself, sorrow for her sister. Bonnie stood silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand. I see the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching. I see how you are together, like two halves that fit. I am happy for you both, truly. But I will need to leave. I cannot stay here and watch you build your life together. It would break me." "No," Beatrice said fiercely, grabbing her sister's hand. "You cannot leave. We have never been apart. There must be another way." But Zachary had been thinking about this too. "There is another way, if you are willing to hear it." Both sisters looked at him with identical expressions of hope and confusion. "My nearest neighbor, 5 miles south, is a man named Joseph Warner. He's a few years older than me, 33, and he lost his wife 2 years ago to fever. He has a son, a boy of 6, and he is struggling to manage his ranch and care for the child alone. He is a good man, honest and hard-working. I have known him for 4 years, and I trust him." "You want to pass me off to your neighbor?" Bonnie asked, her voice flat. "I want to give you an opportunity," Zachary corrected gently. "If you wish to stay in these mountains to be close to your sister, Joseph might be looking for a wife as much as I was, but only if you are willing. I will take you back to Rawhide myself if you would rather try your fortunes there or help you get to California where there are more opportunities. I will not abandon you, Bonnie. You are too important to Beatrice, and you have become important to me as well, like a sister." Bonnie looked at Beatrice, a silent conversation happening between them. Finally, Beatrice spoke. "Joseph is a good man. I met him when Zachary and I delivered some furs to his place in January. He was kind, and his son is a sweet child. But only if you want to, Bonnie. Only if your heart can accept it." "Can I meet him properly before deciding?" Bonnie asked, addressing Zachary. "Of course. I will ride over tomorrow and ask if he would be willing to come for supper. You can talk to him, see if there is any possibility of a match. If not, we will find another solution." The next evening, Joseph Warner arrived on a sturdy bay horse, his son perched in front of him on the saddle. Joseph was a tall man, not as heavily muscled as Zachary, but strong in his own right, with sandy hair and kind blue eyes that held a deep sadness. His son, Thomas, was a quiet boy with his father's coloring and a shy smile. Supper was initially awkward, but Bonnie had prepared an excellent meal, and Joseph was genuinely appreciative. As the evening wore on, conversation flowed more easily. Joseph spoke about his ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in the mountains, the loneliness of trying to be both father and mother to his son. "Thomas needs a woman's influence," Joseph admitted, glancing at his son, who was drowsing near the fire after the big meal. "I do my best, but I cannot teach him the things his mother would have. I cannot seem to make the house feel like a home, no matter how hard I try. It is just a place we sleep and eat between work." Bonnie listened quietly, asking thoughtful questions. She learned that Joseph's wife had been a mail order bride as well, that they had grown to love each other deeply over their 5 years of marriage, that her death had devastated him. "I placed an advertisement last year," Joseph confessed, "but I could not bring myself to answer any of the responses. It felt like replacing her, and I could not do it. But the truth is, Thomas needs more than I can give him, and I am tired of being alone." As the evening ended and Joseph prepared to leave, he asked Bonnie directly, "Would you be willing to receive me again, to let me call on you properly? I make no promises, and I expect none from you, but I would like the chance to know you better." Bonnie glanced at her sister, at Zachary, then back at Joseph. "Yes, I would like that." Over the next 6 weeks, as spring truly arrived and the mountains exploded with wildflowers and new growth, Joseph became a regular visitor. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with Thomas. The boy, initially shy, warmed to Bonnie's gentle nature and her seemingly endless patience with his questions. Zachary and Beatrice, meanwhile, were building their own relationship without the shadow of indecision hanging over them. Zachary formally proposed one evening as they stood on a high ridge watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. He had no ring to offer, but he gave her a necklace he had made from a grizzly claw and polished stones from the stream, something that represented the life they would share. "Yes," Beatrice said, kissing him with a passion that made his blood sing. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in late May by a traveling minister who passed through Rawhide twice a year. The wedding was small, just Joseph, Thomas, Bonnie, and a few people from town who had become friendly with Zachary over the years. Beatrice wore a dress that Bonnie had helped her make from fabric they had purchased on a trip to town, a simple cream-colored cotton that made her glow with happiness. As Zachary slipped a gold band he had purchased with a season's worth of furs onto Beatrice's finger, he felt complete in a way he never had before. This woman was his partner, his equal, his love. She would stand beside him through whatever came, and he would do the same for her. The celebration was modest but joyful. Joseph had brought a fiddle, and he played while they danced in the clearing outside the cabin. Even Thomas was coaxed into dancing, spinning around with Bonnie until he collapsed in giggles. As the evening wound down, Joseph pulled Bonnie aside. They had been courting for weeks now, and something had grown between them, slower and quieter than what had developed between Zachary and Beatrice, but no less real. "I know this is not the most romantic moment," Joseph said, his hands nervous on his hat brim, "but seeing your sister so happy today, I could not help but want the same. For me, for Thomas, and for you if you will have us. Bonnie Palmer, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Bonnie had known this was coming. She had felt herself falling for this gentle, wounded man and his sweet son. What she felt for Joseph was different from what she had felt for Zachary, less intense perhaps, but deeper in its own way. With Joseph, she felt needed in a way that satisfied something in her soul. "Yes," she said, smiling through happy tears. "Yes, I will marry you." The two couples were married in a double ceremony 6 weeks later, again by the traveling minister. This time the gathering was larger, as word had spread of the unusual situation, and people were curious. But their curiosity was met with nothing scandalous, just two couples clearly in love and ready to build their lives together. Bonnie moved to Joseph's ranch with Thomas, and though she was 5 miles from her sister, the distance felt manageable. The two couples visited often, and the children that eventually came along grew up more like siblings than cousins. Beatrice gave birth to their first child in the spring of 1879, a healthy boy they named Nathaniel. The birth was difficult, and Bonnie stayed with them for 2 weeks, helping Beatrice recover and teaching her the basics of caring for an infant. Zachary was terrified of his tiny son at first, his huge, calloused hands seeming far too rough for something so delicate. But Beatrice showed him how to hold the baby, how to support the small head, and soon Zachary was completely smitten. Bonnie and Joseph welcomed a daughter later that same year, a dark-haired girl they named Catherine. Thomas was delighted to have a baby sister and took his role as big brother seriously. The family dynamic shifted and settled, with Thomas finding security in Bonnie's steady presence and Joseph rediscovering joy he thought he had lost forever. Life in the mountains was never easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, lean times and times of plenty. But the two families weathered it all together, supporting each other through sickness and health, joy and sorrow. Zachary and Beatrice had 3 more children over the years, 2 girls and another boy. Each birth reminded Zachary of how lucky he was to have found a woman strong enough to thrive in his world. Beatrice never lost her love for the wilderness, often taking the children on long hikes to teach them the things Zachary had taught her about survival and respect for the land. Bonnie and Joseph had 2 more children as well, both boys. Their ranch prospered under Bonnie's management, her organizational skills proving invaluable in running a successful cattle operation. Joseph often said he did not know how he had survived before she came into his life. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. The sisters, though living separate lives, remained as close as ever. They visited at least twice a week, their families gathering for meals and celebrations. The children ran wild together through the mountains, learning the ways of the wilderness from their fathers and the strength of family from their mothers. In the summer of 1890, 13 years after Beatrice and Bonnie had arrived on that dusty stagecoach, the two families gathered at Zachary and Beatrice's cabin for a special celebration. It was Zachary and Beatrice's anniversary, but more than that, it was a celebration of the family they had all built together. The children, ranging in age from 11 down to 3, played in the stream while the adults sat in the shade of the porch Zachary had added to the cabin years ago. Zachary, now 41, had silver threading through his dark hair, but he was still as strong and capable as ever. Beatrice, at 35, was more beautiful to him than she had been on their wedding day, matured by time and experience into a woman of remarkable strength and grace. Joseph and Bonnie sat close together on the porch swing Zachary had built as a wedding gift for them, their contentment with each other evident in every easy touch and shared glance. "Do you ever think about that day?" Beatrice asked her sister, watching their children play. "When we both got off that stagecoach, not knowing what would happen?" "Every day," Bonnie admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how uncertain. And I think about how lucky we were that Zachary was the man he was, that he did not simply send one of us away." Zachary shook his head, a slight smile on his weathered face. "I think I was the lucky one. My advertisement for one bride brought me a wife I love more than life, a sister by marriage I treasure, a good friend and neighbor, and more children than I knew I wanted but cannot imagine living without." "And we got to stay together," Beatrice added, reaching across to squeeze her sister's hand. "That was what I feared most, that we would be separated. But instead, we both found love and happiness within 5 miles of each other." Joseph raised his glass of lemonade Bonnie had prepared. "To answered advertisements and unexpected blessings." "To family," Zachary added, his arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "To love," Beatrice said, leaning into her husband's solid warmth. "To second chances," Bonnie finished, smiling at her husband and then her sister. They drank to all of it, to the strange circumstances that had brought them together and the love that had kept them together through all the challenges the mountain had thrown at them. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, the 4 adults watched their children play. Nathaniel, Zachary, and Beatrice's eldest, was teaching Thomas's sister Catherine how to skip stones across the stream. The younger children were building a dam with rocks and sticks, their laughter echoing through the clearing. "They will have to leave eventually," Beatrice said softly, a note of sadness in her voice. "Go out into the world and find their own ways." "Maybe," Zachary agreed. "Or maybe they will love this land as we do and choose to stay, build their own cabins in the mountains, raise their own families. Either way, we will have given them roots and wings, and that is all any parent can do." The years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes of time. Zachary and Joseph expanded their operations, working together to create a small settlement of mountain families who supported each other through the harsh realities of wilderness living. The settlement never grew large, perhaps a dozen families at its peak, but it was a real community. Beatrice became known throughout the region as a skilled tracker and hunter, one of the few women who could match the men in the wilderness skills. She also became a teacher of sorts, instructing other women who came to the mountains about survival and self-sufficiency. Her reputation grew, and she received letters from women back east asking for advice. Bonnie's organizational skills and business acumen helped Joseph's ranch become one of the most successful in the region. She also opened a small school in their home, teaching not just her own children, but those of the other families in the area. Education was important to her, a gift her own father had given her, and she was determined to pass it on. In 1895, when Zachary was 46 and had been married to Beatrice for 18 years, he took her on a trip to the highest peak in the region, a journey that required 3 days of hard climbing. They left the children in Bonnie and Joseph's capable hands and set out, just the two of them, the way they used to do before the responsibilities of family tied them down. At the summit, standing above the clouds with the world spread out below them, Zachary pulled Beatrice into his arms. "Do you ever regret it? Answering that advertisement, 'This life is not what you were raised for.'" Beatrice laughed, the sound clear and joyful in the thin mountain air. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. Adventure, purpose, a love that fills my soul, children who are growing into remarkable people, and a life that challenges me every single day. What more could I possibly want?" "An easier life," Zachary suggested. "A bigger house, more comfort, servants to do the hard work." "Comfort is overrated," Beatrice said firmly. "This life, hard as it is real. Every day I know I've earned my place here. Every night I fall asleep exhausted but satisfied. And every morning I wake up next to you, ready to do it all again. That is worth more than all the comfort in the world." Zachary kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, the way he had on their wedding night and countless times since. She was his partner, his love, his life, and he could not imagine walking this path with anyone else. As they descended the mountain the next day, they talked about the future. Their children were growing up, would soon be making their own choices. Nathaniel, at 16, was already talking about claiming land further up the mountain, building his own cabin. The others would follow in time, each finding their own way, but hopefully staying close, keeping the family together. By 1900, the new century, Zachary was 51 and beginning to slow down. Not much, not enough that most people would notice, but Beatrice saw it. She saw the slight hitch in his step on cold mornings, the way he rested a bit longer between tasks. He was still strong, still capable, but time came for everyone eventually. Their children were grown now, or nearly so. Nathaniel had indeed built his own cabin and married a girl from one of the other mountain families. Their eldest daughter, Rebecca, had shocked everyone by deciding to become a doctor, leaving for medical school in California, but promising to return and serve the mountain communities. The younger children were still finding their paths, but all showed signs of the strength and independence their parents had instilled in them. Bonnie and Joseph's children were equally successful in their own ways. Thomas had taken over much of the ranch operation, allowing Joseph to slow down as well. Catherine was engaged to be married to a young man from Rawhide who wanted to learn ranching. The younger boys were still in school, bright students who benefited from Bonnie's dedication to their education. On a crisp October evening in 1901, the extended family gathered once more at Zachary and Beatrice's cabin. It had become a tradition, this annual gathering, a way to mark the passage of time and celebrate their continued blessings. The cabin was full to bursting with people, 3 generations now. Nathaniel had brought his pregnant wife and their toddler son. Rebecca had managed to come home from her studies. The younger children and their cousins filled every available space with noise and laughter. After supper, as the adults sat around the expanded table and the children played in the loft, talk turned to the past. "Tell us the story again," one of the younger children called down, "about how grandmother and great-aunt Bonnie both got off the stagecoach." Zachary and Beatrice exchanged a smile. They had told this story dozens of times over the years, but it never got old. "It was August of 1877, Zachary began, his voice still strong despite his years. "I was standing outside the trading post in Rawhide waiting for my mail-order bride to arrive. I expected one woman. Instead, I got two. Twin sisters," Beatrice continued. "We were young and scared and had nowhere else to go. We had both answered Zachary's advertisement, not knowing the other had done the same. Grandfather could only marry one of you," Thomas's daughter, now 10, chimed in. "So what did you do?" "He did what any honorable man would do," Bonnie said, smiling at the memory. "He took us both in and gave us time to figure it out." The children listened, rapt, as the story unfolded once more. How Zachary and Beatrice had fallen in love during that long winter. How Joseph had come into the picture, offering Bonnie a chance at her own happiness. How both sisters had found love and family in the harsh but beautiful mountains. "It was not easy," Zachary admitted. "There were moments when I did not know what to do, when the weight of responsibility for both your grandmother and your great-aunt felt crushing. But it all worked out in the end, better than I could have imagined." "Because love finds a way," Rebecca said, her medical school education not having dimmed the romantic streak she had inherited from her mother. "Because family matters," Bonnie corrected gently. "Because we refused to be separated and were willing to work hard for what we wanted. And because we were blessed to find good men who valued us as partners, not just as wives." As the evening wound down and the extended family began to depart for their own homes, Zachary stood on the porch with Beatrice, watching them go. Joseph and Bonnie lingered, as they always did, for a final word with the sister Bonnie saw regularly, but still missed when they were apart. "We did well," Joseph said quietly to Zachary as the sisters hugged goodbye. "That day you rode to my place and told me about Bonnie. I thought you were crazy. Twin sisters, both mail-order brides, both wanting to stay in the mountains. It seemed like a disaster waiting to happen." "So did I," Zachary admitted. "But sometimes the crazy solutions are the right ones. We all got what we needed, and our children have grown up surrounded by family who love them. That is more than most people can say." Finally, Joseph and Bonnie left with their brood, leaving Zachary and Beatrice alone under the stars. The cabin was a mess, dishes everywhere and children's toys scattered about, but neither of them cared. It was the mess of a life well lived, full of love and family and joy. "Tired?" Zachary asked, pulling Beatrice close against the chill of the autumn night. "Exhausted," she admitted, "and happy. So very happy." They stood there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the familiar sounds of the mountain night. The stream babbled its constant song. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, an owl called from the pines, all the sounds that had become the soundtrack of their life together. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Beatrice asked. "When we arrived and you realized there were two of us?" "I said I could not marry you both, but would not leave either of you stranded," Zachary recalled. "I promised you would be safe under my roof until we figured out what to do." "You kept that promise," Beatrice said. "You kept us both safe, gave us both the chance to find happiness. That took strength and honor, Zachary. Not many men would have done the same." "I did what was right," Zachary said simply, "and I was rewarded beyond measure. You gave me everything, Beatrice: adventure, love, children, purpose. You took my lonely life and filled it with meaning." "We did that for each other," Beatrice corrected. "That is what partnership means." They went inside finally, cleaned up the worst of the mess, and prepared for bed. As they lay together under the quilts Bonnie had made for them years ago, Beatrice's head on Zachary's broad shoulder, they talked about the future. "I want to grow old with you," Beatrice said. "Right here, in this cabin, surrounded by our children and grandchildren. I want to watch the seasons change 100 more times. I want to wake up beside you every morning until I cannot wake up anymore." "Then that is what we will do," Zachary promised. "This mountain, this life, it is ours. We claimed it together, and we will hold it together until the end." The years that followed were kinder than they might have been. Zachary and Beatrice remained active well into their 60s, still hiking the mountain trails, still working together to maintain their land and their cabin. Their children returned often, bringing grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren to learn the ways of the mountains. Bonnie and Joseph were equally blessed, their lives filled with family and the satisfaction of work well done. The two couples remained close, their friendship and family bonds deepening with each passing year. They were there for each other through illnesses and losses, celebrations and milestones, the way family should be. In the spring of 1915, when Zachary was 66 and Beatrice 60, they took one last climb to their special peak, the place where Zachary had asked her if she regretted her choice. It took longer than it used to, and they had to rest more often, but they made it to the summit. Standing there, older and slower, but still together, they renewed the vows they had made 38 years earlier. No minister, no witnesses, just the two of them in the mountains that had been home for so long. I love you," Beatrice said, her hair now silver, but her eyes still bright with the fire that had first attracted Zachary. "I loved you that first winter, when I did not even know what love was. I loved you on our wedding day. I loved you through every child born and every challenge faced. And I will love you forever." "And I love you," Zachary responded, his voice rough with emotion. "You were worth waiting for, worth the confusion and complications of that first year. Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard days, especially the hard days. You are my heart, Beatrice, and you always will be." They kissed there on the summit, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded any dream they might have had. When they descended this time, they knew it would likely be their last climb to that particular peak. Their bodies were telling them to stick to lower elevations, to gentler trails. But it did not matter. They had their memories, and they had each other. Zachary lived to be 73, a good long life for a man who had lived hard in the mountains. Beatrice was beside him when he passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night in 1922, his weathered hand still holding hers. She mourned him deeply but not hopelessly, knowing she had been blessed beyond measure to have had 45 years with the man she loved. Bonnie, who had lost Joseph 2 years earlier to a heart problem, moved in with her sister after Zachary's death. The twin sisters, who had arrived in Rawhide together so many years ago, spent their final years together as well, surrounded by the families they had built and the legacy of love they had created. When Beatrice died 5 years later, peacefully in the same cabin where she had spent most of her adult life, she was buried beside Zachary on a hillside overlooking their land. Her children and grandchildren, Bonnie's children and grandchildren, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by her strength and kindness gathered to say goodbye. Bonnie lived another 3 years, cared for lovingly by her own children and Beatrice's. She spent her days telling stories of the old times, of the journey west, of the mountain men who had saved her and her sister, of the lives they had all built together. When she finally joined her sister, Joseph, and Zachary, she was laid to rest in the small cemetery that had grown on that hillside, alongside the family she had loved so much. The descendants of those 2 mail-order brides and the 2 mountain men who had married them continued to thrive in the Nevada mountains. Some stayed, continuing the ranching and mountain traditions their ancestors had established. Others went out into the wider world, carrying with them the lessons of strength, family, and love they had learned. But they all remembered the story of how it began, with twin sisters who both answered an advertisement, a mountain man who sheltered them both, and the love that grew from that unusual beginning. It became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most complicated situations can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The cabin still stood decades later, maintained by the family as a historical site and a reminder of their roots. Visitors would come, drawn by the story, and would marvel at how people had lived in such isolation, such hardship. But those who were descendants understood. This was not just about surviving hardship. This was about choosing to build something meaningful, about finding love in unexpected places, about creating family bonds strong enough to last generations. The mountains remained unchanged, indifferent to the small human dramas played out in their shadows. But for those who had lived and loved there, for Zachary and Beatrice, Joseph and Bonnie, and all the family that came after, those mountains were not indifferent at all. They were home, witness to a love story that had beaten the odds and created something lasting. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the pines and the stream sang its eternal song, those who knew the story could almost hear echoes of the past, the sound of children laughing, the ring of an axe splitting wood, the low murmur of couples talking as the sun set, the music of a fiddle at a celebration. The story of the twin sisters and the mountain man became part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of the place, a testament to the power of love, the strength of family, and the courage it takes to build a life in the wild places of the world. Years turned into decades, and the family tree that had begun with that chance meeting in 1877 grew and flourished. Some branches reached into cities and careers far from the mountains. Others stayed close to the land, ranching and farming and guiding tourists through the wilderness their ancestors had helped settle. But regardless of where life took them, every member of the family knew their origin story. They knew about the advertisement, about the unexpected arrival of twin sisters, about Zachary's honorable decision to shelter both until the right path became clear. They knew about the love that had grown between Zachary and Beatrice, between Joseph and Bonnie. They knew about the challenges faced and overcome, about the family bonds that had made survival possible. And they carried those lessons forward into their own lives, understanding that sometimes the best things in life come from the most complicated beginnings, that love is worth fighting for, that family is everything, and that honor and integrity matter more than convenience or comfort. The legacy of that August day in 1877, when two frightened young women stepped off a stagecoach in Rawhide, Nevada, lived on in every generation. It lived on in the strength of the women who descended from Beatrice and Bonnie, in the honor of the men who could trace their line back to Zachary and Joseph. It lived on in the family gatherings that still happened regularly, in the stories told to children, in the values passed down from parents to children to grandchildren. The Wild West era faded into history, but the love story that had begun in that time remained timeless. It was a story about courage and risk, about trust and honor, about two sisters who refused to be separated and two men who made that possible. It was a story about building something lasting in a harsh and unforgiving land, about finding joy in simple things, about partnership and equality and mutual respect. Most of all, it was a story about love in all its forms. Romantic love, certainly, the passion between Zachary and Beatrice, the quieter devotion between Joseph and Bonnie, but also familial love, the unbreakable bond between twin sisters, the love of parents for children and children for parents, and the love of place, the deep connection to land and mountain and sky that defined all their lives. The mountains kept their secrets and witnessed countless other stories over the years, but none quite like the tale of the twin sisters who both answered an advertisement, the mountain man who sheltered both, and the family that grew from that unusual beginning. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth celebrating. And in the hearts of those who descended from those brave pioneers, it would live forever.